So I've got us in on Rumble, and let's see, should be coming in on YouTube soon.
What's up, Rumble?
And then next time, Sam, as you were saying, we will also be live on Twitter as
Sure, why
well.
not?
Yeah.
Apparently, they're giving away money.
Well, they're trying to pay the creators who are essentially govern that platform.
Makes sense.
Yeah. All right. So I've got it. Perfect. So, welcome to the Q2 livestream for FreedomCast
All
2023.
right.
Sam,
Round of
what's been good
applause,
with you?
everybody.
Round of applause, yeah.
Oh man. All right. Well, life has just been a killer. So, my podcast frequency has suffered as a consequence, but such is life. And I've got my next one coming out because I've had a few people ask me about it. My next one coming out hopefully will be very, very soon. It's all scripted. I just have to record it and sort of just get it all there and edited, but it will be on Bitcoin and sort of my case for Bitcoin through a maybe conventional wisdom lens. But, anyways, that's going to be my next episode. That's what I'm trying to work on in between my day job, my family, my other stuff, which I should really just put that all on the back burner.
Can you elaborate on the other stuff?
Oh, I can't do it live. No.
Okay. All right. It'll be in the show notes.
Yes.
And we do have our
Let's at least wait 2 minutes before we get demonetized.
right, our marketing guru Kyle here as well. Kyle, you want to say hi?
Yes, I can say hi, and I do apologize. Actually, no, I can't. I'm not going to make any apologies. We were visiting family this week, so I'm on the road, and one of the perks of calling in on live streams is the technology allows us to do so. So I will not be on camera today, but I am, like I said, traveling. So I do apologize in advance for any quality issues experienced. But glad to see everyone here, and if you're viewing this afterwards, I'm glad that you can stop by our channel. You want me to go ahead and give an update on some podcasts?
Sure, man.
Right.
If you want to talk about Thought Pioneering, go for it.
Yeah. So thought pioneering, similar to Sam, we both have newborns, infants. His is a little bit older than mine. One thing I realized is how between that juggling a new job and just other things that hit you, it's kind of hard to produce content. So what I wanted to do was a mini series called, it's kind of like an innovation mini series. So I did start that this last month, and I plan to do one each month. It's about 5 minutes long per episode, and the goal is to be able to do these mini episodes each month, and then maybe once a quarter do a more in depth conversation. Maybe I have like someone like a guest panelist or something, talk more about it, like a more in depth conversation. But these mini series episodes about sharing innovative ideas. So it's what's going on around the world. What are some, and to me too, it's some things that I found interesting. So the first one is an idea that pops talking about movie theater popcorn, the psychology and the science that goes behind the movie theater pricing on popcorn and how you get tricked with the decoys to get the larger tub of popcorn for an extra 50 cents. So I'm talking a little bit about the history of that and also how movie theater popcorn is designed. The way you pop it also determines your profit margins. So I gave you like 90% of the episode just now. So if you want to spend an extra 2 minutes, you can get the full episode. So wanted to get something quick out there that you can digest.
Kyle, so I went to the theaters over on July 4th and we saw a movie, and we're standing in line to get some concessions because we don't go often, so it's like, yeah, let's load up on the popcorn and the drinks and everything. And there's this old well, it was more than a couple. There's probably about like 3 or 4 elderly people in front of us, and they were just, it was like a buffet to them. They were like, I'll take 4 large popcorns and this and that and that. And then the guy was like, that'll be 62.50. And like they turned to one another and they're just like jaw dropped. They like couldn't believe. And I was like, where have you guys been? Concession prices are through the roof. It's unrealistic. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there because I found that quite funny.
That's good.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it'll definitely slap you in the face if you're not careful. That's why I am all about the discounts. So
Yeah.
Kyle's a
Yeah.
platinum subscriber to AMC theaters.
No,
Well,
dude.
he had
Ever
that
since
pass.
yeah, the movie pass. Ever since
Yeah.
I stopped going to
Kyle's the
AMC, I
reason they
think
went bankrupt.
yeah, exactly. I was the one keeping them afloat, pretty much. As soon as I stopped going to AMC, filed for Chapter 11. So I'm just kidding. That's false information. Before we get too far out there, that's all. It's all jokes.
Kyle, do you own a lot of stock in AMC?
My financial advisor does not allow me to answer these questions that could potentially end up in lawsuits.
Yeah,
or
neither
jail
does your
time.
CEO of FreedomCast. We'll have enough trouble without that. Kyle, I think you talk about anchoring bias in that podcast. I think that's what the phenomenon is with the pricing.
Yeah, you talk about like the
Small, medium, large
the-
pricing, the experiment they're in.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. I haven't heard it described to me that way, so you might have to enlighten me there.
No, it's just essentially you anchor to one number, and so instead of comparing it to your preference, you compare your reference is not your preference. Your reference is the first number you saw. So.
Oh yeah. So yeah, in that case, then you anchor onto the small.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you're like, well, if it's a $3 for a small popcorn, but $6.50 for a medium, or
We're getting
$6.50 for a
popcorn for
large.
$3.
Yeah, if you're given only two options, you can be well, the small is $3 and the large is $8. I'm not going to go for a large. But if you see a small that's $3, a large for $7.50, I mean a medium for $7.50 and a large for $8, you can be like, oh well, the large is only 50 cents more. I'm getting the better deal. So.
Yeah, and you may be anchoring on something other than small price. By the way, Franklin, welcome. We haven't seen you in a couple live streams.
Thank you.
Our globetrotter.
I know, it's been a while. Yeah.
So.
Oh yeah,
Been a while.
Franklin, where have you been? Are you at liberty to say?
Yeah, I've been in France for a while. Spent a little over 3 weeks in
you're-
France.
You're the reason for the collapse over there.
He got out. Dude, every time he travels to go
yeah.
abroad, there's some like international incident that goes off.
He's like, I was the
Yeah.
second gunman.
Yeah. Then I spent a couple weeks up at Martha's Vineyard. It was pretty nice. I'm in Virginia for a week, and then I head back down to Florida.
Nice.
So,
Very cool.
yeah.
You weren't there like during the riots in France, were you?
Oh, yeah, they were going on. You know,
they were?
normal.
Oh, okay.
That's like normal French stuff, though. Like, if the
Oh,
French aren't protesting and rioting, you know, they're not really French.
I was gonna say. That's
Yeah.
what makes him French.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Well, quick update on the From Is to Ought podcast. My production frequency is about to shoot up probably the second half of this year, specifically focused on a protracted miniseries on fake news. I don't know how many it is. I feel like if there's 30 episodes on it, you can't call it a miniseries. But that's the goal, is for up to that many. Got a list of guests that I'm going to be sending out emails to probably next Tuesday. And yeah, it's been a long time coming. I'll have one other episode probably out this year at least, and it will be not all 30 of those are coming out this year, but I'll have one other standalone episode out on gun stats versus the narratives around gun violence, and so we'll take a deep dive on that. And then other than that, we've got some good news on the FreedomCast front. I pulled our numbers last night, and after tonight's stream, we'll probably roll over 3,000 cumulative views and streams for the network. So that's not nothing. Oh, and I received word last night that From Is to Ought is a top 100 social science podcast. So that's kind of cool.
Who's got the
awesome.
soundboard? Who can do the horns?
Okay.
Pew, 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 pew.
But
Kyle, get on that.
yeah, right.
We need streamers on screen and everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're not quite that fancy. I'm just glad
there
that
yet.
it looks like we're actually live streaming successfully to 2 platforms. Okay. So that's the updates from the podcast. We also have another piece of information. Let me pull this up here. So from our thumbnail for this live stream, we said we were going to introduce something called Podcast Bingo. So let me pull that little diagram over. And in order to encourage people to listen to our podcast, but also a diversity of other podcasts, you can see we've got these different productions here on screen. So here's the rules. Essentially, it's a way to win free merch. If you email us, bingo@freedomcast.us, with 5 consecutive connected in any way, diagonally, horizontally, vertically, podcast for which you've listened to 2 episodes, and you can screenshot proof of that. Just show us on your Spotify or your Apple iTunes, whatever it is, YouTube, hit watch history. If you have essentially a bingo with these podcasts, we will send you some free merch, and this will happen to the first 3 people who send us a completed bingo card. So that starts, now, and will run until we hit 3 people. Sam, what did you think of that idea?
Let me unmute myself.
Please. On this
Please
live
allow myself to unmute myself.
Right.
I had never heard of it. I had no idea. That was the first time I ever heard of that podcast bingo, which is a very interesting idea. I need to take a good look at that podcast card just to see if I'm even in the running. Because first of all, I don't listen to any of y'all's podcasts, so that's out. No, I'd have to take a look because there was a few on there that I know I listened to, but I got to make sure that I get some sort of diagonal there. But it's an interesting idea, and it's a good way for people to encourage people to listen to a little bit more stuff, because we all are guilty of being stuck in our own bubble.
Right. Yeah. And so I tried to pick podcasts that I knew were either popular enough from kind of traditional outlets, like the New York Times has a small daily podcast they put out called The Daily, to kind of, the new media players, right wing, left wing, stuff on law, stuff on, long interviews like the Rogan stuff, philosophy. So there should hopefully be enough in there for people to find 5 podcasts they don't mind listening to 10 episodes of, either historically or on a forward-looking basis. And and they get some free FreedomCast merch. So happy to do that. By the way, we're sending out this week. I got in the last of our gifts for our guests we've had on. So those will go out tomorrow to the Fremist Ott guests, and the Thought Pioneering guests. Their stuff should go out next week, right, Kyle?
That is correct. I'll be in town, and I'll be able to send everything out next week.
Perfect. Cool. Awesome. Okay, so one more topic before we move on to the kind of open-ended section of the live stream and the presidential primaries is that we are going to be launching a new podcast. We have one in the works, Franklin and I, and that one's slowly coming along, but that will be out, God knows when, but it'll come out. Probably
kind of a complicated topic.
Yeah, it's very complicated. But I look forward to that. It's on kind of like history and international issues related to Central and South American countries and the United States. So it's a challenge. But we have another podcast that I'm starting, which will be a podcast for anonymous guests. So the way this will work is people can reach out to us at freedomcast@protonmail.com. or to me directly at mlewis@freedomcast.us, and we will screen guests for the topics they wish to discuss. But here's the twist. It can either be a solo venture with the guest, or I'm happy to provide a back and forth interview style for the podcast, but the guest will be anonymous. And the reason we're doing this is for a couple ideas, couple motivations. One, we feel like maybe not everyone wants to start a podcast. It's quite possible that many fewer people, including present company and myself, should maybe not have a podcast. But there's probably people who don't want to sign up for a whole podcast, but maybe they'd like to get 1, 2, 3 episodes out there on some issue or issues that they find important and that they have some unique thoughts on. We'd like to provide a mechanism to do that, and we'll help people with the getting up to speed on how to do that and producing it, and we'll obviously host it and distribute it and all that kind of stuff. But the other reason is we want to provide a way to push back against like the cancel culture side of things. So this is a way to get ideas out without fearing retribution. We kind of acknowledge that to varying degrees, different stuff we talk about may be controversial in some quarters. And we have decided that taking the risk of saying what we think, honestly and courageously and hopefully, with a tinge of wisdom will be sufficient to push back on this. But we understand some people, they want some more concrete assurances, and we will, from a technological perspective as well as a contract perspective, we'll get that in place. And then lastly, this is also an idea platform for people who want to blow the whistle on something that they have to say. And for that kind of stuff, we'll have to do a little bit more vetting before we just open it up for episode production. But those are kind of the main motivations. So if that's of interest to you, feel free to reach out to us. And yeah, what do you think, boys?
I think there's a few things I'd like to blow the whistle on in my current organization.
Oh yeah.
Yes, this one.
Yeah. Okay.
Feeling a lot of discrimination.
You can file that with HR.
Yeah,
Kyle.
no,
Yeah.
Kyle.
Yeah.
Take it up with HR.
I don't think I haven't worked in HR in like a year, so
Once in HR, always in HR, Kyle.
All right, HR boy.
Mike and I actually we're going to start a comic series, the HR boy and data sci guy.
Yeah, it's a superhero and his sidekick.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, those are the updates. So going to probably cross 3,000 reach, which is cool.
Awesome.
We've got podcast bingo for a merch giveaway, so fill that out. You can either pause the screen, or I'll maybe put it in like the first comment under the video. So I'll try and have a hyperlink to the file on our website. You can download and dab your bingo card or dab your bingo card, whatever the appropriate term is there. And we have this kind of anonymous podcast that I'll launch before the end of the year. And we've all got more episodes. Sam with Bitcoin. Kyle's going to continue with his innovation miniseries, and I'll be coming out with some fake news interviews soon. So that should be cool.
So with your history of Latin America countries, like what exactly are you guys going to be talking about? Like the relation between the U.S. and those countries, correct?
Part of it.
Part of it.
Yeah. So it's tough. Tell us what you think, and tell us what you think in the comments. The idea was we were going to try and introduce some of the relevant history for the country to kind of orient ourselves, or probably more me than Franklin, and then
The listeners.
yeah, exactly. And so that would give us some familiarity so that when we start to talk about how U.S. geopolitics is interfaced with that country or those countries, we have some sense for why things went well or didn't go well, or why there's certain challenges today. And then we'd release the ideas. We'd then release it first draft in English. Then we'd use ChatGPT or Bard, as well as Duolingo in our. Franklin's pretty fluent in Spanish, but we'll also release it in Spanish. But that will be straight scripted from our English presentation, and it'll just be kind of a semantic process of updating it and then re-recording it. So that's the idea.
Very interesting. I look forward to hearing that.
Yeah. Hey, Frank.
Go ahead, Mike.
I'll say, what's the first country?
It's El Salvador.
El Salvador.
So we're going to look at the Bitcoin empire.
Yeah, right.
Sam's favorite places right now.
Yeah, I'll talk to you a bit later about real estate down there. I'm very, very interested.
Okay.
I have some prime real estate if you'd like to buy it.
Right.
Sure.
We sound so sophisticated with Franklin's globetrotting. You looking at property in El Salvador. Kyle's at a CIA black site right now. That's why he doesn't have his camera on. So, all right.
It's a great picture of him, though.
Cool. All right, so let's kick it off. Kyle, you mentioned you had a couple of discussion prompts that you wanted to kind of open the 2024 primary stuff with. So, what are those?
Yes. So, and I'm just going to preface this, like, of the people on this call, when it comes to politics, I'm probably the furthest detached. So mine are just discussion prompts when it comes to what I'm going to throw out there, just so for me, I can expand more. But those discussion prompts are around, I guess I would have had to classify it like the validity of the candidates. So like age requirements, cognitive requirements. We have a minimum age requirement for president of the United States. If I'm not mistaken, I think it's 35 or 30. Yeah. Has to be an American-born citizen. So you have those requirements. But the age, should there be an age limit? I know in the corporate world, we do have an age limit on CEOs. However, in some corporations that have hostile takeovers, they can kind of choose whatever. Essentially, they can make make the rules change and have CEOs that are in place that are well beyond the mandatory retirement age for that position. So that would be one of my first question. Another question is there a world where Trump and Biden aren't running for president and we have, let's just say, a fresh set of candidates, a fresh start? Call it the Green New Deal.
Well, it's not, but
No.
fair enough.
Yeah, you know what I mean.
Got you. Wait, hold up. There's a mandatory cap on CEO age?
I'm glad you asked. It all depends on what's the bylaw. It all depends on the bylaws. So it all depends on what rules are set forth for that organization. That's usually set by the board of directors.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no like set standard, but for a company that you and I both were a part of, let's say the said CEO cap was I can't remember off the top of my head, it might be 68 or something. It's been a year, so let's just say for example it was 68. But then they want to bring in a new CEO that is like in the mid 70s, and so they changed the law or the rule, not the law, but the rule to say let's go ahead and bring this person in, and that person is now the new CEO, and where they would normally be they wouldn't normally qualify as a candidate because of their age. So
interesting, yeah, because you were talking about laws for the presidential, right? Okay, I got you. Okay, sorry, Sam.
No, I motion that we take a vote right now as the sitting board members of FreedomCast to vote on the age requirements for CEO. Mike, how old are you?
We'll talk about that later.
Actually, I don't know. I think Kyle's the only one younger than. No, Franklin, you're younger. Yeah, Franklin.
I'm the youngest.
Yeah.
Franklin's practically a baby.
Anyone over
Franklin
30?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Franklin doesn't even know what a 401k is because his company didn't offer it to him because he's so young.
It just occurred to me, this is not the first company we've all worked at.
That's
true.
true.
That's
Yeah,
That's true.
we all worked at a cigar shop while we were in college at different times.
Ironically, it did very well until we all left.
Correlation is not causation, but in this case,
correlation is not causation, but there is a very strong.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun, boys. That was a good.
That was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we would sit in a cigar shop and dream of this day. Literally.
I thought we would be a lot richer.
I mean, it depends on how you classify being rich.
That's true.
Fair enough.
All right.
So, what would you propose the maximum age be, Kyle, for president? Would you say 75, or would you have it correlate with age of retirement?
How old's Biden right now? I'm
Security
just kidding.
benefits.
I would say going into the 70s. I mean, you really have to really look. Of course, me saying, like, yeah, 75 is completely anecdotal. So I have to really take a look and say, what is, like, when do you start losing cognitive decline?
Oh, well,
like normal cognitive, huh?
If that's the question, then maybe a way to rephrase this is, do you think it should be an age limit? Because you can then run into like cases of like discrimination, like, ageism essentially, like you're codifying that in the law. Or do you think maybe all presidential candidates should be required to pass like some form of cognitive test?
Yeah.
I guess rephrase it
on FreedomCast.
I look at it as like for an airline pilot, you don't see very many 90-year-old airline pilots out there, let alone 80-something-year-old airline pilots.
Okay.
So it's a matter of safety. Like, can you make should you be in a position to make sound decisions? The science would tell us that that's where it gets the cognitive thing. The science would tell us as you get older with age, no matter what gender you are, your cognitive abilities start to decline, some more rapidly than others, depending on various conditions. I'm gonna say post-traumatic experiences, but based off of like life experiences, based off of medical and health conditions. So yeah, that's kind of a stickier question.
I kind of feel like you also should be able to, at the bare minimum, work a 40-hour week, right? And I'm not so sure that our current president is doing that. Maybe he is. I don't know. But you for like, high functioning CEOs, they're like constantly working. I feel like you should be able to manage that. If you don't have the energy to even get that done, yeah, it's probably not so good.
Well,
I also agree that it should be more cognitively associated rather than age.
Yeah.
I might push back on that just a little bit too, because like, how would we classify a 40-hour work week? Like, does that mean just like ass time, like butts and seats? Is that, or is it like productivity? Because like you can sit in the chair in the Oval Office for 40 hours a week and be like, all right, I work 40 hours.
Right. What you need to have exact. And I think more what I'm getting at is just the energy and mental fortitude to focus for that period of time, because it's true, you don't have to do much physical and manual things. You mostly just sit at the Oval Office and bark orders, but
Right.
you should be able to do that for a long period of time without having to take breaks or go get like some medications or something like that.
Ice cream.
Nothing wrong with some
Ice cream.
Yeah.
Chocolate chip.
That's a great flavor.
Right here, they had a lot of
Great
this new type of ice cream that leaked out from the CIS guy. It's in form of powder.
Yeah.
Well, side note on that, did you see that they just said this evening that they found marijuana on multiple occasions at the White House also?
Under Clinton?
Yeah. No, under our current president. Yeah. Sidetrack there.
Man.
Yeah, I just wonder how much of this stuff gets like amplified by, like, a lot of people care about these stories now, but it's like, were we even looking previously? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Snoop Dogg allegedly smoked weed on the roof of the White House.
That's pretty well documented, I think. Perhaps even by him.
And I kind of believe him.
Yeah.
And I just remember hearing about this, but I'm sure lots of presidents did, but Kennedy in particular, he had like ladies over, several of them.
Yeah.
And it was like pretty well known.
Yeah,
so that's sort of debauchery, yeah.
Well, but yeah, it's like, again, it's okay, great, now we're focusing on it. But I don't know. I would rather just like say like, what's the behavior we'd like to see in a president, and then just, hold everyone to those standards. It's like at least set up the rubric beforehand instead of just getting to pick and choose. Like, I don't know. It's like the clickbaitiness of news these days.
No, it's my thing with JFK. Like, I really want to like him because politics are pretty good. However, like him as a person, he wasn't the best person.
Right.
He wasn't particularly a family man. That whole, Marilyn Monroe, Mr. President, that was a mess. Makes the country look bad. Clinton too. I mean, it was bad stuff. Just like Trump. You get Trump doing stuff that he shouldn't be doing. You get him saying, I'm not making payments to people when he probably is.
I agree. I think Sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, where do you draw the line? Where do you distinguish, like, the man from the office? Or is the man the office?
Well, if you're asking me, then I would say I think you look for certain qualities of a leader and understanding that no one's perfect. And I think when someone is displaying those leadership qualities, some other unfavorable behavior can more or less fall by the wayside. Yeah, there's a ton of stuff that I really didn't like about Trump, his behavior and whatnot, and the things that he would say and all this sort of stuff. But I think he displayed a lot of leadership qualities that I would favor over the current leadership. So I'm, more focused on those things.
Yeah. So I think, two things. One, I don't like the disingenuous nature of a lot of politics, like pretending to be like something you're not, or like allowing a narrative to be shaped around you. And I think that's happened a lot with the cults of personalities in the last few presidents. And maybe it's always been that way. It's just I've just been following it since then. So I don't know. I don't like when it's disingenuous. One example is just using the current administration. A lot of the stuff that gets the right wing worked up about Joe Biden doesn't bother me at all. And sometimes I think it's also disingenuous. Like, if he passes like the CHIPS Act, and it's going to bring domestic manufacturing and potentially reduce our dependence on adversarial countries for important hardware, then it's like celebrate that. That's a win. But the fact that he gets to like parade around as like a noble family man and like just Scranton Joe, and he has a grandchild that he refuses to acknowledge, is troubling. And it's like, that is, like, both those things cannot exist in my book. And I think you can say something like the Bidens, like in the better world, we would be able to say something like the Bidens are like a lot of families, and they have like things that happened that they're not proud of how they happened or why they happened, but they're still a family, and that comes first. That is not at all the impression I get when I read about this grandchild who is not acknowledged. It's like, man, that is so. And then the fact that the media is allowed to spin up something around him about being like, oh, just this family man. And to be sure, he's suffered a great deal in his personal life, historically around his family. But yeah, that kind of stuff bothers me way more than like the, oh, whose drugs were these? And we all can make the joke because it's so obvious. But the fixation on it for weeks at a time, it's like, I think there's probably bigger issues. Secondly, just really quickly, and you can take either one of these or both, but one of the commenters mentioned that he's former military, and he said that in the military, especially high risk and high financially responsible jobs, they have to take some form of test or competency assessment every 4 to 6 months, which I actually think that's like a really good analogy, especially since the president is technically commander-in-chief. It's like, hey, you want to make sure that you're on it. The consequences are very high. Regardless of who's in the office now or previously, it's like probably want to make sure they've got the goods.
Yeah, and I think coming back to something I said earlier, it's like, even if, like you were saying, Mike, that, okay, he can't walk around pretending to be a family man and have all these other issues in the family, I would be willing to ignore the fact, like, let's just assume that maybe he's a deadbeat dad and is just, his family life is in shambles, yet he's a strong, competent leader. And one could argue that qualities of leading a family would transfer to qualities of leading a country. But let's just say, for example, he doesn't do the best job of paying attention to his kids or maybe his wife, but yet he's a strong leader and making good choices for the American people and all this. Like, I'm willing to let that stuff slide. So like, okay, that's fine. He's doing his job, and that's what we elected him to do.
Yeah, it's like the adage, you're electing a president, not the Pope. Yeah, I understand.
It was like this, it was the same thing with Trump. I think I let a lot of stuff slide under him just because he was a good president. The whole scandals with firing escorts and everything. I don't think he's a great family man personally, but he was a good president.
I would say, yeah, one difference there would be something like there wasn't the media narrative around Trump of like, look at this great family man, whereas there is for Joe. And Joe seems to be a more faithful husband, let's say, at least if you're going to believe the plausible rumors out there that around Trump. I don't know. I just, like I said, I don't like the disingenuity, the dishonest nature of a lot of this stuff. But, okay, so to that front, you say you want someone who's got some leadership qualities and who's going to be an effective leader. So we've got Marianne Williamson, RFK Jr., and obviously President Biden vying for the Democratic nomination. Cornel West is running as a third-party candidate. Then we have Trump, Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, Tim Scott, Chris Christie, Larry Elder, and Vivek Ramaswamy. I think that's all of them. Probably not. Running for the Republican nomination.
Did you mention DeSantis?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the landscape, at least as it stands. Actually, I know I've missed at least one or two Republican candidates, but for now, let's say that's sufficient. What do you think? What's appealing to you about some people versus others? And we can talk about specifics, or we can talk about personalities, whichever way you guys want to take this.
Well, I can really only talk about those that I've watched and followed, because there's several Republican nominees that I or candidates, I should say, that I haven't even paid attention to. Well, one is like I love Larry Elder. I really like him. I have been listening to him for quite some time now, but I'm not so sure that he'll make it across the finish line, even though I think he'd probably be a good president. I don't really have anything bad to say about him. But I'm more or less, because I already know so much about him and his views, I'm not really paying attention a lot to him. Mostly I'm looking on the Republican side. I'm looking at Vivek, DeSantis, and Trump. And
are you looking at them for the same reasons, or is there something unique about each one of them that appeals to you?
Well, actually, there's something unique about each one.
Okay.
And there's certainly some overlap in the Venn diagram, but I would say with Vivek, he has proven himself to be, and again, so has Trump, but a very qualified businessman. But I also think he's incredibly sharp, and he knows his stuff, and he's been doing a pretty good job because he goes on these contentious shows and is not afraid to back down, and he's there giving his opinions, whether or not the hosts or the interviewer agrees with him. And so I really like that aspect of him. And then for DeSantis, of course, I was a huge fan of how he handled COVID. So, and I think everybody in Florida probably owes their, I guess, I don't know what you say, owes their maybe current freedom or something like, nothing that drastic, but a lot of people moved there specifically for his handling of COVID. So I really admire him there. And for Trump, what I hope happens is that if he does get in, he just cleans house. Because
what does that mean?
I think that
You're fired.
Yeah, you're fired. I think that the reason why they're going after him so much is because he's on target and they don't like him. And so he's getting close to...
Who's they?
Everybody that screams and tries to stop him from becoming the president. So there, I think there's a maybe a large unelected state that doesn't want Trump in the White House, and I don't think that those individuals and those organizations and those three-letter agencies have my best interest at heart. And so because that they hate him so much, I tend to think that he's over target and he knows it. And I would hope that he comes in and at least, well, I think his first presidency exposed it, but I hope he does something about it if he gets in again. Yeah, so those are my thoughts on the Republican side. I don't know if anybody else wants to comment on anything I just said.
Wait, just before we move on to someone else, I know you have family who is, has different political perspective than you, and good. But what are some of the things that you've heard that appeal to them about either the current president or some of his challengers?
It's a good question. I only know of, so none of my, if you're just asking about family or close friends, mm-hmm. I don't know of anybody who's defended the current president, defended Biden. However, there is some support for, and I believe her name was Marianne Williamson. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is some support there, and I think my biggest issue on that is because I paid attention to some of her, I guess, policies, mm-hmm. and they're very socialist in nature, and it's one of these kind of platforms that's like everything's a human right.
Oh.
And my response to that is something along the lines of anything, well, because it's just overwhelming the things that some people, maybe socialists especially, think are human rights and that are just you are entitled to. And I certainly think that there are some things like that, but my stance is nothing that requires the effort of another human being is your right. And I think you see a lot of that amongst socialists and people running on the far left.
But what is it about Marianne that appeals to your family member or members or friends?
Oh, because she's promising a lot of things to people. I mean, as all politicians do, they promise a lot, and they say, "Well, we'll get you this, we'll get you that. You'll have this. You'll no longer be, your hospital bills won't be so high. Your student loans will be erased. We're going to do all these things for you." And I don't think that if you're in favor of those positions, I don't believe that you have properly thought through the third order and beyond effects of some swooping legislation like that. So.
Okay. Yep. All right. So, Kyle, if you feel, I know you said you kind of like the one most tuned out at this point, of the three of us, or of the four of us rather, potentially, and that you may not have an opinion yet, but if you do have an opinion about any of the candidates or something you've heard interesting in support of some or against others, or if there's just some ideas about what you're looking for, kind of regardless of party, what's important to you, whatever way you want to take it, buddy.
Yeah, what's important for me right now is I look at the state of our country, and
what do you mean by that?
The state of our country, like morale. If I'm looking at the morale of the country, recruiting for military is down, I think, like 15 to 20%. People, I get the sense that people don't like America. We're being kind of taught in one way that we're such a bad country. In a way, not saying like, oh, this is the worst country in the world. Plenty of other countries that have way worse than we do, and that's not lost on me. I think the morale of the country is pretty low. I wouldn't say an all-time low because I've only been here for less than half a century, so I don't know what the rest, aside from what books will tell us. But I'm looking for qualities of a president that can bring the two sides together, kind of narrow that gap a little bit. I don't expect the left and the right to completely agree on everything, but I would like it's like having coworkers. You're not going to agree on everything, but we can move towards a common goal and have healthy disagreements. So,
Kyle, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
The morale. Do you believe that the problem that you see there is it new to this administration, and is it caused by this administration? Can you explain?
I think it's amplified by this administration. Morale is from what I look at it, is like, can you go out and, like you said, can you go out to the movies, take your family, and get out of there for less than $100? Probably not if you got a family of four.
That's your morale? Wait, that's your definition of morale? Or like...
No, that's a contributor.
Okay.
I was really into movies.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm voting based on cinema policy. Yeah. I'm a single issue voter.
That's the second time that you brought up movies.
Guys, I'm paid by that. I'm paid by Cinemark. So, no.
Real quick word from our sponsors.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of as inflation, the ability to go out, entertainment value. Like, there's still plenty of people out there that can afford to entertain, and you can be creative with how you entertain your family, you entertain yourself. But when you are forced with, hey, do I put my kids in daycare, or do I put food on the table? Like, what can I afford to do? Well, I can't afford to send them to daycare because I have a cutthroat job that I have to basically be unhappy at just so I can afford to put food and send to daycare. And so it's the means to an end, and you lose value, like you lose sight on like what it is to be an American in some cases.
Okay.
Just having the free, like in a way, you're not as free as you really think you are.
So you're saying something like the purchasing power of like most Americans, something like that. That's the most important thing to you, and then the ability to like not further drive people apart. Is that right?
Well, if I had to say the most important thing is to be able to to think freely. If I had to, I was going to put a pin on it. is to be able to think freely, but also like be able to speak freely. And right now you can't really do that without somebody having essentially, and there's ways to speak freely, and like with respect, right? I'm not saying like, oh, you can just speak freely, you just say whatever you want. Um, I mean, if you're being like a decent human being, you're understanding like, okay, my words have my words have consequences, and what I have a lot of power with my words. So what can I do with that power? So yeah, I think for me, like morale is a combination. There's no one important thing. It's a combination of things. The ability to go out, live a fruitful life, which you still can do. It's a lot more strained now because of the current financial state of things.
Mm-hmm.
It's the looming uncertainty of, are we going to lose the U.S. dollar? Like, what is that going to do? And with the new currency coming out, or not new currency, but new. That's what I don't know too much about. But just if we lose the purchasing power of the U.S. dollar for like oil and gas, well, that craters things a little bit. So it's just, there's a lot of that. So quality of life tends to be a little bit down, which people will say, hey, we're spending more money. It's like, yeah, because things cost more. So going back to not looking at, just because we're spending more money doesn't mean that we're still getting the same amount, or does it still mean we're getting more value? Like, no, we're just spending more dollars.
Yeah. Okay.
And getting less with that.
So yeah, I think that goes back to the value argument, like quality or quantity relative to cost. But okay, right. It sounds to me like because you're the one who brought up morale. It sounds like to me that you're saying it's a multidimensional kind of concept to you, but that they're all related in some way. What we should do, man, is if you want to do a mini-series episode on your vision of this, then we can talk about, there's a thing called formative constructs, and that's essentially what you're discussing. And we could talk about maybe ways to measure that, and then we can put a little nice line graph together, and we can trace it over time. Maybe that'll be helpful for people.
I'm down with that. Yeah, I think your mini-series are actually called seasons.
Yeah. No, for your podcast, buddy. Or maybe maybe a crossover.
Yeah.
But yeah. All right, so before we go on to...
Wait. Hang on. I want to jump in for just a second.
Okay.
Because there's something that, Kyle, you'd mentioned in the beginning, and I just wanted to add something. It was the idea that maybe the U.S. isn't so favored amongst the other nations, and people are kind of like, I don't know, not liking the U.S. now. So I would say I guess it's all about perspective, because I actually was, during the majority of Trump's presidency, I was not in the U.S. And a lot of because the media coverage was so much against Trump, everyone pretty much hated the U.S. Because of Trump outside the U.S. And so even though you might think, well, and I would agree that Trump is probably a better president than Biden, the outside looking in is skewed. So you had mentioned that maybe other countries don't like us, and I'm sure that maybe they don't, but it's hard to tell because of media coverage. So, and I don't actually know. So maybe they do like us.
There's so much subjectivity.
Yeah.
So, thanks, gents, for that. Before we move on, Franklin, get your thoughts on things. I want to address some stuff going on in the comments. So, David, we're going to come back to yours because they're more related to the Republican primary. So we'll come back to that after we've kind of all given our initial opening salvos. But Joe kind of had expanded on something earlier. He's the guy, former military, he's talking about the competency assessments. He says that in his interactions, and this relates to something Elizabeth said too, which is like values and virtues play a part in what some people believe. And think of a leader. To what extent do you think that values and virtues can predict leadership potential? And then kind of an extension of that, do you think that there are some behaviors that are so morally bankrupt that would be disqualifying for a leader, even if they were effective? Because that's the argument you're making, Sam, was like, oh, well, if you're an effective executive, the personal foibles don't faze me. But is there a limit to that? So does character predict leadership? Is that a fair thing to say? Do values predict leadership? And then are there certain lines beyond which you'd say, I don't care how effective you may have been in your previous executive function, you're not morally sufficient for the job.
Yeah, I would say there's probably a high correlation between your character and how well you lead. And as far as certain qualities that might disqualify you, certain personal disadvantages, I guess, there certainly are. And I'm trying to kind of word one in my head to sort of say it, but something along the lines of, if you're gonna lead, you have to put other people first. And if that's a quality that you don't have, putting other people first. So if you are at the White House or in a leadership position, strictly in a self-serving capacity, I think that should disqualify you.
Strictly in a self-serving. Well, would you argue that so independent? Because I would say that would make you an ineffective leader, probably. So I'd be curious how you think that interfaces with Trump, how much he thinks about other people, but also the separate and apart from the efficacy issue. Do you think that there's anything that, like, okay, we could elect someone who is like truly a racist, not like racist that gets bantied about now, but like someone who's truly racist, believes like one race is inferior to another. And it's like, yeah, but they're really good on domestic and international policy.
It's a good question.
Thanks. It's not mine. It's from
Yeah.
exceptional.
Well, because I'm
viewing
trying,
audience.
I'm just trying to think through that in my head. So, if they are known to discriminate towards one group in a very extreme fashion,
Mm-hmm.
yet they are a good leader, that would be difficult because you would have to see how that discrimination plays out into his ability to govern.
How their racism, if it interfaces, because I'm not saying that they do discriminate. Maybe they just have a belief and they have no problem espousing it. Hey, I believe whatever Middle Eastern folks, since I'm part Middle Eastern, are inferior to all other races or all other ethnicities, and it's not that I discriminate. It's just that that's what I believe, and I talk about it a lot. But I'm going to be a good president.
Yeah, I think there.
By the way, that's going to get clipped out of context for sure.
if you think that is, wait for my answer.
Oh God. Okay.
Just wait till you run for president, Mike.
No, never.
See, I told you.
Mike's racist.
I don't think so. If you, here's the thing, you can be the most like racist person in your head, and then even if you say it, like if Mike, if you're on this podcast and you just tell the truth and say that you're racist to everybody,
Okay.
Yet how you treat others is not a reflection of that, then I think that's a different story. But some would argue that that's going to seep into how you treat others.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in this hypothetical situation, if the president were just be like, yeah, I hate left-handed people or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
but his policies don't reflect that at all, it'd be difficult to hold that against him. Now,
Well,
I realize that left-handed people are, even though they are highly discriminated against now, it's a small group. But yeah, it's hard to say. But I don't think that just having that idea, even if it's well known, if it's not acted upon, it's another thing.
well, the head of our executive branch is de facto the single figurehead of the country. There's checks and balances and multi branches and whatever, in federalist structure. That's all great, but the president is the cardinal individual to which people think, I would imagine, when they think about the United States, and within and as well as abroad. That's different than a place like the UK, maybe, where they have this kind of monarch artifact, and they have the prime minister role. So, like, the reason I'm bringing this up is because we don't have someone who can embody the the spirit as distinct from the civil aspect like the UK does. So given that we only have one figurehead, for lack of a better term, then is it important that that person lives up to both of those functions? And if the answer is yes, then I think that I'm with you that if they don't ever voice their beliefs and then thus they don't put into action, then then you're just judging someone's unspoken thoughts. That's like kind of ridiculous because there's no way to verify that. But if they're going around saying like reprehensible stuff, but their policies are good, I still think that the saying reprehensible stuff has the potential to, are you poisoning the well for people who support him? Like now they're all being associated with this malignant aspect of this individual, and or maybe they're thinking, oh well, that's okay, that's what we should aspire to.
Yeah, and I'm not so sure that I disagree. I would say that I think the United States ought to be as an identity, should be a collection of ideals rather than one man. So whether or not it is a different thing. So like you said, if you were to just mention the United States and people just think of the president as the sole leader, that may or may not be good. And perhaps you could argue that there needs to be less, maybe, who knows, outward facing public role or influencer type behavior coming from presidents.
Sure. Yeah.
But it would be better if the U.S. was just thought of as a collection of ideals. And yeah, you could argue that if, say, a racist president is not living up to those ideals, it's possible. But it would surely have to depend on how he's leading the country and how he's holding up some of those other ideals. Like, okay, all men are created equal. And even if you as a president don't believe it, yet all of your policies reflect that, then it should say something positive about your leadership. Maybe you as a character is flawed, but your ideal and like how you're leading that idea should stand for something.
Well, that goes back to I think you actually did a podcast on that too, Sam. Was it about character? There's, when I look at the leader of the country, leader of the free world, that person was elected by that country to represent that country. And so while there's more visibility at that level, there's definitely when it comes from a leadership perspective, there's definitely a lot of trust eroding behaviors that a president can exemplify that people tend to lose trust in him I'm saying him in the sense of right now we have a male president, but trust in that president as a leader. And then next thing you know, that we diminish that position down to what we're saying now is, well, the leadership qualities are less and less that are required. Our standard of a president, if you look back into the 80s to now, our standard for a president, I think, is way lower.
I think perhaps one convert. So if we look at it high interpersonal ethics, low interpersonal ethics, low efficacy as a leader, high efficacy as a leader, that 2x2 grid, it'd be interesting to think about where you'd place certain presidents in there. Because I think you could look at someone like Jimmy Carter. I think it's fairly well regarded that he was not a particularly effective president, but he seems like a very decent and good man. And in some ways, I would say more people should aspire to be like Jimmy Carter in their lives than they should aspire to be like Trump. In some ways, if you want to say, okay, well, they're successful businessmen, great. But, I want a civic body that has something like the ethos, well, maybe it's not the right word, but that can try and have both. And actually, I think you should demand both probably from your leader. And Sam, I think your effectiveness argument is a very good and strong one, and is a primary argument for selecting a leader who's responsible for very consequential executive decisions. But I also think that there are things that, if they espoused, you would say that's disqualifying.
Yeah, like I said, I don't think I'm necessarily disagreeing with you. To separate the efficiency of your policies and the efficacy of being a leader versus your interpersonal skills or your moral character.
Mm-hmm.
You know, yeah, you're right. You may not want a president who makes the wrong decision at every turn and plummets our country into chaos, yet is a kind and decent person in the real world to his family, to his friends, to everyone else. Even though that person is probably a great person.
Same reason you wouldn't want that person to be your boss or your subordinate at work.
Right.
Right, because there's a job to do.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I mean, like I said, I don't disagree. You should strive for both. But if you're picking one, you know, to be the president, I would pick one who's good at the job rather than the one that's shitty at the job but a nice person in real life.
Okay, so
is that DeSantis? You know, he's pretty good at his job. He's a pretty good person. Or would he go for the other option? I think that's the question right now. And is he electable?
Well, I think you're bringing that up because he said essentially that only 3 candidates really appealed to him with respect to the research he's done thus far. Okay, I got you.
Well, 3 candidates on the Republican side, yeah.
I think it's also the 3 candidates that are the front runners right now, on the Republican side. Yeah, I mean, I've heard Glenn Youngkin from Virginia might run, but you know, not big. But
you're up in that part of town. You're up in that part of the country, right, Franklin? What's the view of Glenn Youngkin up there?
Actually, I met him like 2 weeks ago.
In France?
Ran into him. No, at the airport.
Okay, on your way back from France. Okay.
Yeah, we were being delayed at the airport. I don't know, whatever. I like him. I don't think he's the best speaker. His policies are great, and he was able to thread this needle where he was able to receive endorsements from Trump, but not use Trump as his primary selling point, which is really big. You know, he had that endorsement, but didn't really use it. It was kind of always a backup for him. He always used his policy as his main winning points, and it's what got him elected. His policy on education is one of the reasons why he got elected in Virginia. I like him for Virginia. I don't think he'd make a good president, maybe a good vice president. Yeah, that's how I feel about Glenn Youngkin.
So I'm assuming that you just shoved the liability waiver for FreedomCast in his face and that will be uploaded to our servers shortly. And he'll announce on our next live stream. So coming soon. Okay. So you said you could see him as being like a vice president, not a president. Normally when I hear people say that, they mean something like, I wouldn't vote for him first, or I don't think he could win, but he's someone I think would be an asset he or she is someone I think would be an asset as, you know, a wingman. Is that what you mean, or do you mean something else?
So I think you need a dynamic speaker to be a president.
Okay.
You need someone who can convey the message across. I was not a big fan of Obama, but he could speak.
Yeah.
You know, when he talked, people listened.
Yeah.
You need that. I don't think he's there yet. So that's why, policy-wise, make a great vice president. Can he speak? Not really. I think there's better people. I really like DeSantis. I also like Trump. I'm not sure how well it's going to go for DeSantis. Florida doesn't want to give him up. I spent a lot of time in Florida. Most Floridians don't want to give him up. They think their state is going to go down the drain if he gets elected. They don't know who to replace him with at the moment. It's a big issue.
It's a classic one of those, we don't want to promote you because you're so good at your current role situations.
That's funny.
Yeah.
That's a good analogy, Kyle. Okay. Well, I guess I'll take it a little bit. I don't know who I'm voting for. There's certain candidates that I'll donate to before the first debate just because I want to try and marginally increase their likelihood of getting on stage because they need a certain number of small dollar donors. Last election cycle, I donated to candidates from both parties. I imagine I'll probably do the same this time. But yeah, I don't know. I think that for me, I think the effectiveness argument that Sam articulated is important, especially in an age where we do have this influencer culture, and I'm fully aware of the irony saying that on a podcast live stream. But you risk indulging in the superficial and rewarding the superficial. So the effectiveness argument needs to be a primary one. But I do have a problem with several of the people running. I think for example, Nikki Haley, David, and we'll start roping some of your earlier questions back in. Nikki Haley making a naked appeal to identity politics. It's like, okay, well, you're out because regardless of whatever my political perspective is, I know that worldview is incompatible with a virtuous conservative political perspective. So, likewise, people have a lot of love for Trump, and on some level, I suppose I understand that. But there's behaviors he's undertaken that, and actions he's taken that I would say don't endorse the idea that he's selfless or that he's primarily a man of virtue in the civic sense either. I'm not even on the interpersonal side. He's got the most annoying campaign emails in the history of mankind. He raises the money on the backs of a lot of high-profile incidents, and then it's not clear to me that he uses those for anything other than paying his lawsuits or his own re-election fund. So, and I mean that's probably the nature of politics more generally, but he's certainly an exaggerated example of that. So David had mentioned earlier that he had a couple of questions about. Okay, do you think DeSantis, so this is getting at the effectiveness argument, do you think DeSantis would get more done than Trump on policy? And yeah, and then he essentially shares my sentiments for Nikki Haley. So I guess to the extent you want to talk about the Republican side, and we'll talk about the Democratic side too, because I think that's maybe even more interesting. But does anyone have a strong opinion about who would be a more effective leader, Trump or DeSantis?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
And call this my ignorance to the way the system works, but does it factor in on when it comes to policy and what a president can do? Does where the party lines sit in the House and the Senate have a big role into that?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I might take a first stab at it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it depends on where the cards fall. If there's I didn't study this. Ask me about water. I'll tell you a lot about water, but I didn't study politics. It would make sense to me if there was a heavily Democratic House or Senate, let's just say in that situation, okay, and there was a Trump president. I think he would get so much pushback, it would be almost impossible that things would become stagnant, versus a DeSantis to where they may not hate him that much just yet. They might be able to push some things through. So I think that's my opinion on it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Trump, his first 2 years in office, he had the House and the Senate. Anyone want to talk about what his biggest legislative accomplishment was? Yeah, so it's not glowing endorsement for the effectiveness argument. But okay. Anyone else have a thought on Trump versus DeSantis?
I think DeSantis would be more effective policy-wise. I think he could push stuff through. I think he'd be able to unite the Democrats and the Republicans on different causes. I think Trump is so polarizing that anything that he tries to pass is an automatic no for most Democrats.
Yeah,
it's kind of unfortunate, but
that's a hypothesis. So you're estimating, you're proposing a difference in effect. And I would say, and I've mentioned this to one of our supporters who's tuning in now, I mentioned this in 2020. I said I would bet money that if DeSantis' profile continues to rise, that the same types of attacks in the media that have been lobbied against Trump, irrespective of validity, will be lobbied against DeSantis, irrespective of validity. And I think I think that that prediction has turned out to be true. And so it's not obvious to me whether, DeSantis, people don't know, he's increased teacher pay, he's increased pay for civil servants, He's got kind of a more middle of the road, stereotypically, even though it's not. Being anti-environmental does not make you conservative and vice versa. But he's certainly got some pro-environmental stuff he's done in Florida. And we'll have some of that in the newswire probably this week. But anyway, it's like, that's not going to be the stuff that people hear about DeSantis if he were to make it to the general. I don't have much faith in news media institutions to try and provide a well-informed opinion on political figures, but rather to provide a particular opinion on political figures. So I hope you're right, Franklin. I hope that like something like, despite such things, people in Congress and or their constituents would say, okay, well, if DeSantis is the president next, then let's get some useful stuff done. I don't know if that would be the case.
I do think, yeah, he's.
Do you
certainly...
think that?
Sorry, go ahead.
You say, do you think that politics has become so polarized that no matter who gets elected, nothing will be able to really pass through Congress and Senate?
I would say that the friction, the slowness of our system, and the adversarial nature of it is a huge benefit. The government should do less and do what it does better. Unfortunately, that's not been the case. That's my general perspective anyway. And as we become a more material wealthy country, it's okay if the social service, in my opinion, the social services we provide grow. But yeah, the hyperpolarization, the structure of our government that creates friction is good. The hyperpolarization that creates friction, I don't think is good. And I think what it does is it also allows people to become hypocrites personally and politically, to support something or some institution one day and turn around and lambast it the next. And sometimes it's on a principled basis, and that's fair enough. But when it's not on a principled basis, then it's, it just makes the problem worse. And I don't know how you, other than just individuals saying, I'm not going to opt into that dynamic, I don't know how you avoid that death spiral of hyper-partisanship.
So, Mike, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
I mean, is it fair to say, in your view, that Trump is more polarizing than DeSantis?
I think if you said, if it depends on how you measure it. If you said something like two people who are not going to support the Republican candidate, no matter what, which of these two do you dislike more? I think probably Trump would. My impression is probably Trump would be more disliked. If you said something like, would you support the actions of either of these men as president? I think you'd probably get a strong majority that would say no. And I think that will increasingly be the case. But there's an important thing here. This is not just like it's like the other political party, we have a difference of opinion. I think a lot of it is going to be around these cultural issues. And the cultural issues are important. I'm not someone who says like you shouldn't engage in it. It's just that it gets back to the dishonesty thing I was talking about earlier. The level of dishonesty when covering some of the political issues and battlefronts in which DeSantis has found himself or made himself engaged drives me insane. And because of that dishonesty, I don't expect people to have the interest or time to go and read about it in a million different outlets to try and get a more comprehensive view. I think that
you're talking about the dishonesty of the
media, probably
news media,
primarily, yeah. So the answer is like, yeah, Trump is probably more polarizing for now, but if DeSantis were to get the nomination, I don't think you could. Maybe people would feel differently, but I don't think that the project of many in media would be to say, let's give this a sober shake. But maybe I'm wrong.
Well, so the question is, yeah, I agree. I don't think they would play it fair if either were the nominee. But then the question is, I mean, which do they hate? Who do they hate more? Because if their actions are driven by feelings and fear and hatred, and which I believe that probably there are, then it would seem to me that they would there would be more resistance to a Trump presidency than a DeSantis.
Yeah, I mean, maybe until you get spun up and fearful about Ron. And this works both ways. There's one of the primary critiques of the modern instantiation of the Republican Party is that its media apparatus, mostly people talk about Fox News, is that they're fear driven. They're designed to get people worked up about progress, whatever the hell that means, etc. So we have one comment come in, says, it's pretty wild. In the last 2 or 3 decades, I would argue, is the perfect blend of being articulate, foundationally sound in virtue and character, and also savvy in political dealings as a president. I have no idea if that's tongue-in-cheek or if that's with respect to saying that everyone since, I guess that would be like the 90s, the presidents since the 90s kind of all share these characteristics, or maybe in aggregate they have those characteristics, but feel free to clarify. And then David, who's the one who originally put forward the question about the Republican primary, he makes the claim that Dems will always find a way to vilify conservatives. I'm not convinced it would make a difference which candidate. So there is this perception on the right that, it doesn't matter how good. This is the Mitt Romney example. Hey, Mitt Romney was very much not a culture warrior conservative. And, our current president stood up in front of a largely black church. There was other folks there as well, and said he's going to put y'all back in chains. Because Mitt Romney said he wanted to unchain the economy, and Joe Biden said he wants to put y'all back in chains, which is a highly inappropriate thing to say. Kyle, you are there. We go. In my view, and so that would certainly give credence to this. There's also this notion of there's an old adage that Republicans think Democrats are wrong, Democrats think Republicans are evil. So if you think someone's wrong, you try and convince them. If you think someone's evil, then you don't have to convince them. It's just about winning. But, these things, I would say they're probably a little more bidirectional than people think. David's question then, he modifies it to say, okay, well, given that there's going to be this animosity towards whoever the Republican president would be, who's the most capable of getting things done? So it just goes back to this, who's more effective. And I would say it really depends, man. Like, I'm not saying I want someone who's just capable of getting things done necessarily, if that means that they accumulate bad precedent as just absorbing more and more executive power. Because if we're saying that the coordination between Congress and the executive is off the table, then you're pretty much just making the case that grab as much executive overreach as possible, and that's one of my primary critiques of the current administration. I give them more credit than I think many, but that is one area I have an issue.
So then the question might be, between Trump or DeSantis, who would expand the reach of the government the most?
Oh, so you're taking the other side of it. Yeah.
And I'm not so sure I know the answer to this, so I'm curious for everyone's thoughts.
Yeah, I don't know.
Because I think I agree that an accumulation of power is never good. Ideally, my ideal candidate would just be like, I'm dismantling the government and getting out of your way for the most part.
Yeah, so that's a libertarian kind of thing.
Right, but I'm not. I know, and I'm not that far libertarian, but tell me what you think about this, because I'm not necessarily a one. What do they call that? A one issue voter.
Issue voter.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But one of the biggest issues that I see nowadays is the difference and the split between the elite and everyone else. Okay. And that would include anybody. I'm not making a left-right claim here. I'm saying that there are, I feel like there are certain people who are pretty much above the law and get away with a lot of things. And so it seems to me that Trump would be the one to come in and to rein that in. I'm not sure, but as far as that issue goes, because I do see that being one of the biggest problems with today's world, with the U.S., I should say. And It seems like Trump's kind of I think he's over the target with identifying this and trying to push back. If nothing else, his first presidency just sort of unveiled the whole thing. And I think that's why I think they're throwing so much indictments at him and legal crap and all this other stuff. So I'm hoping that he comes in and sort of puts a stop to all that.
Okay.
No.
I don't know how effective he'd be though.
Yeah, I mean, we had 4 years of, and I would say actually, despite the reputation, he was somewhat more transparent and cooperative than history will probably say he was. But in the time since, he's certainly not been. I don't know, man. I think the Trump thing is, like, here's the thing. I'm open to the idea that there's a double standard being perpetuated by what some people would call the deep state or the bureaucracy or the blob or whatever. The administrative agencies have a different standard that they take to some people, regardless of political party, but who are just disfavored. Kyle, you're unmuted, buddy. So that's appealing. I could buy that at least partially, but there's not really an excuse whenever it's like Trump's under on all these indictments. The DA in New York is making up new procedures by which he can go after Trump. I'm with you. Like, that seems ridiculous. That's the show me the man, I'll show you the crime thing. That's antithetical to a just governance structure. But then Trump, when he gets on the phone with Brad Raffensperger in Georgia and essentially says something like, find me like 13,000 votes. It's like, no one forced you to do that. That's you. And that's just like, oh, well, what if he effectively won the next election? And great. But I kind of feel like that should be off the table. We should have a candidate, not be willing to accept a candidate that makes that phone call. So that's my biggest gripe with Trump, is that it goes back to something you were saying earlier, Sam. I don't buy the idea that he is fundamentally thinking about other people. I do think, unlike many people, that I do think he loves this country, but I don't think he's fundamentally concerned with other people. And maybe I'm wrong, but that's my read on the issue.
Yeah, could be. And like I said, maybe that's the 4 quadrant things that we were talking about earlier. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, if it's whoever, and the race is still on, whoever can convince me that they would be willing to go after that so-called deep state would have my vote. And I mean, I'm not, and this maybe is a good segue into RFK Jr., because it seems like he is right. He's right on target there. And I would not be upset at all to vote for him if that is what he's going to do. Like I said, that's a huge issue for me. So if he wants to tackle that, and he seems like he's got the legs to do it, then yeah, man, I wouldn't have an issue voting for him.
So before we jump into that, let's clarify what we're talking about. So we're going to pivot into the Democratic side of things, I think. And I know we've got some folks who are certainly more left of the spectrum than we are. So please populate the comments with your thoughts and questions. You're talking about this administrative overreach and the potential multiple standards of justice and evidence that seem to be being circumscribed into, if not law, regulatory policy, and God forbid, but also judicial opinions, and that's a separate issue. But this being willing to tackle that head on and trying to promote something more of hey, this is a country where there is a uniform standard and this country to be proud of, and those are the things we're going to focus on. And you think RFK Jr. is the one on the left side of the aisle who is most espousing a vision for that.
Correct. And there's more there's I think there's a lot going on that would constitute not just people that work outside the law. I mean, going back, Kyle had mentioned a lot about his purchasing power of the dollar going down, and seems like there is the people closest to the money printers and the central banks and all that they're doing a lot of things that are not really that are against the interest of the people, but rather for a lot of the people that are buddy to that inner system. And so if someone's willing to go after that stuff, then yeah, for sure, I'd be all for it. So, yeah, I think RFK Jr. is showing some promise there.
Okay. So he comes from a background of environmental law, and so he's been involved in suing very large companies and very high-profile government agencies. So on that front, it makes some sense that he would be open to the idea that regulatory bureaucrats have some corrupting force on various things. Typically, he talks about it within the domains of where he practiced law or pharmaceuticals, which I'm sure we'll get into at some point. Could be demonetized on YouTube, but that's okay. But a couple quick questions and thoughts from people. He reminds me of a classical liberal. I think that some of the classically liberal values, small L liberal values, like individual freedoms and sovereignty, are reflected in his candidacy. That they're not well embraced by perhaps some on the left these days, at least not primarily. And that, okay, maybe hear him debate with Republicans. That actually might be interesting. Of course, that would not do well for his chances of getting the Democratic nomination, but to the extent that you think, okay, well, maybe this reduces polarization because we can see a cardinal figure who's prominent on the left who doesn't view us as all, ignorant, Bible-clinging, gun-clinging deplorables. It's like, okay, yeah, treat you like a fellow citizen. That'd be nice. I wonder if there's someone who on the right could go and do that in the left talk with Democratic candidates. I wonder if there'd be probably Vivek actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say of everyone who's running, the two people that would be willing to reach across the aisle and bring people together would be Vivek and RFK Jr.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. And then we were asked, can you explain how he can run with Biden as the incumbent? So just because you're the incumbent doesn't mean you're going to be the nominee of the party, though almost exclusively that's how it goes. Essentially, you still have a primary process by which you have to get the nomination. And for those who are interested, you can read about RFK Sr. and his candidacy, where he was challenging the Democratic incumbent at the time. So, Franklin.
Do you think there's a future where, before we get to your question, Mike, do you think there's a future where Joe Biden isn't a Democratic nominee?
I think so. Because I kind of thought this for a while. I think they're just going to find someone to replace him because, well, he is old and it's getting harder for them to cover up his mistakes and, fumbles. So it wouldn't be shocking at all if they say, "Oh, sorry, Joe, you're too old," and they're going to try and slip somebody else in, his handlers or whoever, the DNC, whoever.
So this is a great question. I actually asked someone whose opinion I hold in very high regard, who is of the left, about this. Like, of the following outcomes, what would be most preferable to you? Joe Biden gets the nomination. Joe Biden steps down. And the Democrats appoint, most likely, it seems, Gavin Newsom. Joe Biden is among the candidates that have the ability to run and does run it, but there's an open process. Debates, etc. So I don't know. I think that there is, the cynic in me would say something like, if Biden cannot run for whatever reason, that there would be a crowning of the Democratic nominee as opposed to an unfolding of the electoral process as it relates to the primaries. I don't, again, I try not to feed into cynicism, but that is it's a prediction that, God forbid, may be necessary to test. So, all right. Franklin, so what's your read on the left, let's say, leading into primary season?
I think the left is a messy place right now. I think the main question was that, do you think there's a place where Joe Biden isn't the presidential candidate, or Kamala Harris for that? I mean, Kamala Harris, I don't think she can win. I think she's really unfavorable. Mm-hmm. She hasn't done much, and I think that speaks in and of itself of what she'll do as a president.
She was very popular with the media and not popular with Democratic voters. Kind of remarkable.
Right. It's extremely remarkable. And this whole time, I mean, she's had lots of issues to tackle, and she has tackled nothing effectively. I think RFK Jr. is the only viable option besides Gavin Newsom. Well, I guess there's 3 options. Well, Tulsi Gabbard is independent now.
Yeah, and she's not
So
going to run. I don't think she's going to run.
Running. All right, so let's narrow this down to RFK Jr. and Gavin Newsom. I think
What
Gavin
about
Newsom
Marianne? What about Marianne Williamson?
She has an appeal with some progressives, I think, actually.
Oddly enough, lots of. I was going to say, I've talked to lots of women, progressive women.
Mm-hmm.
They don't like her.
Really? What don't they like about her? Tell me.
They just don't like her. Like, I don't know why. They don't have a reason for it. They don't like her, and they don't see her as a president.
Interesting.
Do you happen to know who they do like?
They like RFK Jr. better, and of course Gavin Newsom, but they don't like. I don't know if it's the fact that they don't like a woman right now, and I need to do some research into this. I don't know that they're not ready for a woman, and that Kamala has left a bad taste in people's mouth of having a woman in office, or if it's something else. But they don't like her.
Interesting. It's interesting they would say Gavin Newsom. So do they? Are you thinking about different people? Some who like Gavin, some who like RFK, or is it?
Yes.
Okay. So it's not that they all like
people,
both.
Some who like Gavin. Yes.
Okay, that makes more sense to me.
Yeah. Yes. And
Yeah, because those are 2 different, seemingly very different people.
very different people. I think RFK Jr. could unite both parties the same way I think Ron DeSantis has the possibility of uniting both parties. These are long shots, so we'll see how this pans out. We're coming into a really messy election season. Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
So we got a couple comments in the chat that are pretty awesome. So our friend Leandra has joined the live stream, or at least joined in the comments. She's been on the live stream for a while. So she says that Gavin Newsom would be a nightmare, and that she has lived in California and his policies are, quote, wacky. So I was like, all right, fair enough. But that some lefty normies, quote unquote, might support him. And I think that that's kind of getting to the mainstream of the political class on the Democratic side. I get the impression that they very much would want Gavin Newsom to be the nominee. And maybe he has the appeal. He's certainly a very slick politician. And he actually, I would say he's a fairly good speaker, for better and for worse. But he has this appeal. But I wonder how much of it's going to be like the Kamala Harris effect or like the Elizabeth Warren effect, where so many in the political and Kyle, just so you know, every time you type something, it pops up on the live stream. But he says Leandra's the honorary top FreedomCast contributor. Fair enough. So we had Elizabeth Warren last time, and who was the other person I mentioned? Oh, Kamala, and maybe even Pete Buttigieg a bit, even though I think he probably had a little bit more organic appeal. But there were these people who were very hyped by the the consultant class and the media class, who there seemed to be a disconnect between how positively they were covered and talked about, or how much deference they were given by those people, versus how much their polling support would indicate. And Kamala Harris is the great disconnect because she dropped out so early. And she was considered like a front runner for a while, but I don't know. I mean, I get that same vibe from Newsom, but I do think there may be something a little bit more sticky with him in terms of electability. And then Elizabeth says that, in her opinion, the primary process should play out. You shouldn't just get the nod just because you're the incumbent. And by the way, I agree with that too. If there was a strong Republican challenger to Trump in 2020 had its own set of issues, so that wasn't the primary focus. But I could see a situation where there's someone in the Republican Party who says, I don't like this guy's morals, I'm going to try and run against him. Wouldn't be effective, probably, but should at least play that out. Oh, by the way, this goes back to one other question. Sorry, and then I'll shut up and let some other folks take over. Earlier we were asked, who do we think the most conservative candidate is? And it occurred to me that I had not mentioned one of the people running, and I think this actually might be the answer to that question, which would be Mike Pence.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Both in terms of like a traditionalist ethos, but he's a little bit more neocon maybe on foreign policy, so that cuts against the traditional aspect. But Mike Pence is someone who, this is a great example of media treatment. You know, he's villainized by the media in some ways until, you know, the mess that was the horrible mess that was January 6th. And then he gets lionized a bit. But they ran with like some stories early on about how he was like prejudicial because of his Christian faith, that he was like prejudicial against Mayor Pete. And my understanding was there was actually no real record of that. He had called Pete Buttigieg when he'd won mayor of whatever town it was, and congratulated him. But it was just taken as like, okay, it's okay to smear him because he has, you know, these personal beliefs and personal faith. So, you know, to the extent he walks the walk and actually does push back on Trump in the debates, that will be fascinating to me. Because if anyone can push back on him with some moral authority, I feel like it's Mike Pence.
I don't
it's
know.
either a blessing or a curse for him, though. I think, yes, he's going to be the only one who's going to be able to really push back against Trump. However, most voters are not. I think most voters are still not going to be drawn to that connection between Pence and Trump those 4 years. And especially the January 6th, I think that leaves, you know, a bad taste in people's mouth. It shouldn't, but it will.
Oh, you mean how he acted?
How he acted, yeah.
I see. Yeah, that's also, I've had some questions about people who are like, oh, Mike Pence let us down. And it's like, well, what exactly did you want him to do?
I mean, there's nothing he could have really done, but that's not the way, you know, the media portrays it and people see it.
Yeah, I understand that the argument is something like, well, the rule is if you have a senator and a House member who both object to the certification of the votes, then you have to like suspend that process pending something. And it's always like, what is that something that you wanted pending? Because we're not overturning the election in all likelihood. But, you know, I don't think that the way everything has played out on that day and since has instilled us with a great deal of confidence in our electoral process. And by the way, these states that take like weeks to count votes after the election, that's such nonsense. Like, what the hell? And so I have a lot of sympathy. Yeah, I have a lot of sympathy for people who like, I don't trust the process. Regardless of what I think about it, it's like, I can see why you would observe what's happened over the last few years and be like, this isn't worthy of my trust.
Yeah.
So on Rumble, we have a comment from Cindy. It says, people are fleeing California and moving to Texas. And given that may indicate the governor has ruined the state, why would you want to support him? And it's like, okay, fair enough. I certainly think that maybe one of our other commenters has also, quote unquote, fled California and is in greener pastures in the Midwest. So God bless, and something to the Midwest that's
I also think, so even though his state has failed, this going back to what you had said earlier, the media coverage, I think Gavin would appeal to low information voters. Just simply like you hear, okay, you know, he's the governor of California and RFK is into conspiracy theories. It's like if that's all you hear and you're not willing to like learn anymore, then a lot of people might just go for Gavin. So
yeah, I would say this is where it's really important just to have I wouldn't say balanced, but like a diversified media diet leading into 2024.
For sure.
Shameless plug for our newswire, the FreedomCast Quran. It is free, freedomcast.substack.com, also freedomcast.locals.com. You can get it either place for free. We source the stories. We don't necessarily endorse all the stories, but they're the stories we find to be one of two things. Something driving the news narratives in that week's discourse, or something that really needs to be kept an eye on a go-forward basis. So, okay, we're going to circle back to a couple questions here in the comments in just a second. But to your point about this maybe kid gloves approach to some political candidates versus others in the media, there was a Business Insider article that came out 2 days ago, I believe, and the premise was, despite what you've heard, people are fleeing Florida. And what they did is they looked at census data, and they misread the columns in the CSV file. That's like an Excel spreadsheet for those who don't know. Just a different version of it. what they had done was they looked at inflow-outflow numbers, and they read the inflow to Florida numbers as outflow. And so they had originally done the articles where it was like, hey, here are the 10 states people are most fleeing and the 10 states people are most coming to. And it was literally the opposite of the truth. And to Business Insider's credit, well, they deleted their tweet. They updated the article, changed the headline, we got it wrong, and they put a very visible editor's note at the bottom. So that's good. Like, it was, you should have caught that. That should not have been a mistake you made, but you made the mistake and you owned up to it. Good for you. And the author set her Twitter account to private, which, you know, I kind of get. She probably got some pretty
understandable,
nasty harassment. Like, I think it's okay to call people out. It's obviously not okay to be a bully to people online, and certainly don't threaten or dox people. That's abhorrent. Okay, so we had one question that says, can you explain how Mike Pence is more conservative in Ron DeSantis in your view? And this person would like for us to use our own definition of conservative. Since I'm the one who made the claim, I would say something like, depending on your definition of conservative, you could probably make the case for either. But in terms of the definition of conservative, that means something like limited government, a outward kind of unapologetic display of the Judeo-Christian ethic, let's say, and the fiscally economic conservatism, that seems to be more in track with Mike Pence than Ron DeSantis. Not that DeSantis isn't any of those things. I don't think he's the third particularly, but he's certainly, my impression, he's not any of those things to the degree that Pence is. Anyone disagree?
No, not really. I really don't know a ton about Mike Pence. I for the most part ignored him, and the only time I tuned in was his debate versus Kamala Harris, and even though Kamala Harris is a predictive speech, robot, I wasn't impressed with Mike Pence. I thought that would have been a grand slam. Like I could have gone up there and crushed Kamala. So, but given the fact that I was not impressed with him, I more or less tuned out.
Okay.
So I really don't know a ton about the guy, which may be a relatively good thing. If he's more or less stayed under the radar and was able to do it, then maybe that's a good thing. But as far as which candidate is most conservative, yeah, I was sitting there and I was just thinking about this in my head. Like I'm not even so sure I could maybe verbalize what my definition of conservative.
What is a conservative?
Yeah. Like, well, you can point to one, but to kind of verbalize it maybe a bit difficult. But that's tough because even I'm not even so sure that I can't even answer that question. However, I don't know. I love to get y'all's thoughts on this because it seems to me that a lot of people, maybe it's just the news that I'm consuming and the content that I'm consuming, but it seems to me that a lot of people are not so much drawing the line between conservatism and liberalism or Democrat Republican, and more or less talking about, say, the everyday man versus the administrative state. And that's why I think I can just as easily reach across the aisle and vote for RFK Jr. I'm wondering do y'all pick up on that? Do y'all feel that? It seems like maybe the lines of separation on who's on what side is less left and right nowadays, and it's sort of turned, and it's more like who's the outsider and who's the insider as far as the administrative state. I'm curious what y'all think, because I kind of see that, and that's why I really don't have an issue with maybe Vivek or Trump, because he's technically an outsider, more an outsider than others, and RFK Jr. I'm curious.
So, I think that there's definitely a dimension that's not just the left right. I think that's insufficiently low resolution. insufficiently high resolution. Like it's a
Well,
low
and
resolution perspective, but
it's also less important, at least for me. But I'm curious if you see that as well.
I don't know. I mean, I think that this goes back to the values and virtues thing. It would depend. There are some values and virtues that fit well along that continuum that do matter to me, but there's others that I think, the other axis that people often point out as authoritarian, libertarian, which again these are not well validated measures, but the extent to which you want to grow government or shrink government, that may be another one. But that's not even what you're talking about either. What you're talking about is something like the willingness to weaponize the civil infrastructure against an apparatus, against disfavored voices, whatever disfavored means to a given political regime. Yeah, I think that's a huge issue, for sure. I agree. And I do think that there are candidates on the right talking about it, and to the extent RFK is talking about it on the left, like, it appeals to me. Does any of the stuff around RFK and the controversies that surround him on the vaccine stuff or on his maybe overly broad painting of regulatory bodies as corrupt and in bed with industry, does that turn any of you off or concern any of you?
So really quickly, before we move on to back to Kennedy, quick question on Pence and DeSantis. Would you consider Pence more traditional Republican, like the traditional conservative Republican, and DeSantis as the more modern conservative Republican?
I mean, it depends on it's like, what do people mean by traditional? It's like, if you mean like Reagan and Bush, it's one thing. If you mean like you're tracing it back to like, Lincoln and the founding of the party, or are you tracing it back to like the conservative ethos, and this is going to be a doctrinal question about some theological beliefs, as certain hosts of the Daily Wire would have it. It's like, okay, great. I mean, it depends on what you're asking, but I would say that I would associate Pence with the more traditional view of a conservative in my lifetime. We were asked, so I gave earlier that I thought Pence was more traditional conservative than DeSantis on some things. And they asked, what about on the social dimension? I don't think that there's a lot of difference between those two on the social dimension. I think that maybe DeSantis actually might be slightly less conservative on the social views, and we'll talk about that at some point. But yeah, on the Democratic side of things, I don't want to give them short shift. So is Sam shaking your head no about the concerns for Kennedy? Why not?
Yeah, because I haven't heard everything that he has to say about all those subjects, but I hear him just a little bit on his hesitation for vaccines. And I think I heard him say that he's not opposed to them and that he himself is vaccinated, but he at least is wondering why we can't sufficiently, or these pharmaceutical companies can't sufficiently provide a certain study or something to prove the efficacy of these vaccines. And I think that's one of his arguments. I can't remember.
Kyle, do you have something?
I was gonna validate that too with first Sam. Sorry, I got a quick cry maybe, but he was for him, he was willing to ask that question publicly of like, why are we making this mandatory when we don't know the long-term effect?
Yeah. And so for me, a lot of those questions just simply make sense. It's a reasonable and sensible question to ask. And so that doesn't concern me. The logical question being posed doesn't concern me as much as the reaction to that question concerns me.
I agree with that.
I'm way more concerned with why everyone is freaking out about it rather than the question itself.
I see. So can I answer to your point about him wanting certain types of studies? He talks about blinded randomized controlled trials to establish that the things we're inferring from observational or other forms of experimental studies are the positive effects of vaccines, so we can validate that those are the positive effects, and then also establish a safety profile in a robust way, because he kind of is making the case that essentially that yeah, maybe might be causing other problems, but we also have a measurement issue in terms of ability to assess it. Part of that appeals to me from like the way he's talking about the process by which it unfolds. Here's the pushback to that, though. If you are a drug company and you spent, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars developing a vaccine, and you feel like you have some reasonable assurance that it will be effective, is it ethical to withhold that vaccine from people who sign up to be a part of your study for the purposes of having them be the control group, a more robust control group? Because that's kind of my read on it is at his best argument is like he wants a better control group. Is that ethical? It's like, okay, well, if you've got whatever, a vaccine for, let's use something terrible like Ebola. It's like, great. So are you going to go to, or Marburg, some country in South America and say, hey, we've got this vaccine, you're having an outbreak, let me inoculate 50% of, some small town, and with the vaccine and the other 50% with a, saline solution. It's like, well, you're pretty much going to condemn some people in the control group to death by Marburg if there's an outbreak. And that's the kind of trade-off that, I think institutional science has done a lot to undermine its own credibility, so I'm not here to defend that, but the process of science is worth defending. And so, but you can't have the conversation about the process of science without a commensurate conversation on the ethics. And that is a competing ethical issue that would be run up against some of what Kennedy's saying, at least.
Could you invoke the first do no harm argument there, or is that only applying to actually doctors instead of pharmaceutical companies?
Oh, I don't know, man. This is a good question. I mean, you could say, well, we're not making people more likely to get Marburg, but if you withhold something that prevents them from getting it potentially, then is that? And if you had the ability to act and you didn't, are you complicit in some way?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know, to be honest. That's a tough one to think through. But again, like, okay,
but
that's a reasonable.
Have that conversation.
Right. That's a reasonable response that you just gave. I don't see that. Where the heck is that?
I think that some people make it and some people, but the problem is, you're right. There's a bunch of people who are like, shut up, that's not how science works. That is annoying, and to hell with that. But there's also a bunch of people who do try and make it, I think, but are still dismissive of people who say that, well, this argument that he's making appeals to me, because they're like, well, you should know better, or we know better, or like, who says you? And it's like, well, no, it's public health. Like, it is by definition something we all have a say in. And by the way, public health only has any valid claims to the extent it can map onto clinical health. So I did post, feel free to comment, guys, on RFK, the questions we were talking about, or any of the other Democratic candidates. But I did ask people kind of what are they most looking for, the top issues or concerns going into 2024 they hope to hear candidates talk about. And we've taught, and Leandra mentions healthcare and cost of living. So Kyle, cost of living certainly gets back to some of the, at least one of the dimensions you were talking about earlier. And healthcare
Movies.
Movies. Healthcare is something Leandra and I discussed at kind of length, I think it was episode 8 of From Is to Ought. And she and I come from different political perspectives, but it is a genuine concern, I think, that a lot of progressives have, and they've been very consistent in the fact that access to affordable health care is a primary concern. So what do you guys think? I mean, there was the whole Trump got in, oh, we're going to replace Obamacare. It's going to be so great. We're going to have the best healthcare in the world. And it was like, I think the best they came up with, or the thing that I remember at least, was they were going to come up with like high risk pools to help manage the administration of insurance better. It's like, okay, that's not really doing anything. Or it's not doing anything. It's just like, that was not the grand replacement for Obamacare we were promised essentially since the Affordable Care Act had been passed. So, I don't know. What do we think? Healthcare, what are y'all's thoughts on the challenges thereof?
Kyle, what do you think, bud?
Kyle's like in the
Well,
middle.
as I have a screaming baby, but I come back to me on that one. I definitely have thoughts around cost of living, though.
Okay, very good. I'm going to step away
Yeah.
for just a second, but gentlemen, keep it going.
Kyle's trips to the movies have gotten crazy expensive recently.
Yeah.
Actually, I will say, like, post-COVID, since they don't do free refills, the trips to the movies have been actually a lot cheaper. And so, like, in a way, COVID took us a step forward in the right direction to getting us back to the 50s prices. But again, it was one of those things where, like, as America, like, and I come from like a sense of waste. Like, Americans tend to be a lot more wasteful. You could put the numbers to that. So in a way, I have found myself wasting less at the movies now. So fun fact.
Yeah, because you bought your own popcorn machine.
Yeah, but I don't take it with me to the movie theater, Sam.
Do you have your own soda fountain at home also?
No, but I have a cotton candy maker now.
Oh my God.
Shaved ice.
All right.
All right.
Try and get this conversation
Healthcare.
back on. Yeah, healthcare. Franklin, do you have
Healthcare.
any thoughts on healthcare? Because mine are kind of wacky and out there. Go ahead.
Okay, healthcare. I don't know. I think mine are kind of out there and wacky also. I travel a lot. I see lots of stuff. Does the US have the best healthcare? I wouldn't say for primary care it doesn't, but for everything else, I don't think there's really anything better, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Primary care, I think other countries are doing it better, but for experimental surgeries, drug creation, I don't think anyone has any better way of doing it than the US. And if that means monetizing pharmaceuticals, then that's what it is. You have to give people an incentive to develop stuff.
Do you think you can have both?
I think you can.
And so how would you go about it?
I haven't really given this much thought like that, developing a plan. I think you'd have to separate what's essential primary care and then into what is more experimental, not necessarily elective, but more, like the serious stuff, like, once you develop, I don't know, I think diabetes could be one of the things that is put into that category. It's not a super serious medical issue for most people, but it's something that is separated. Day to day, you should be able to see whoever you want. It's a very tough place to be.
Yeah,
especially for children. I think children should get free medical care. But that's a whole other topic. I don't know. What do you think, Dan?
Let's
get wacky here.
I'm not very. It's gonna be uneducated because I don't know a ton about the healthcare system and let alone how I could fix it. But it seems to me that you want some level of baseline care, and you also, like you said, want some incentives to advance technologies and innovations and lower prices for some of the more expensive stuff. So the line that you're going to have to walk is finding where that social layer stops and where the free market begins. And I don't think we've done a good job, and maybe we've dropped the ball on that. Maybe other countries have done it better. It's very possible. As far as my wacky stuff goes, I don't do healthcare anymore, or sorry, insurance anymore, health insurance anymore.
Oh,
yeah, I stopped. I do something else. It's not technically health insurance, but because it's not through an insurance provider, but it's sort of like a crowd-funded type of thing where you get sick and submit your bills and a crowd would fund it. But that seems to attract, at least for me, well, it seems from what I can tell, a healthier group of people. So in the long run, my costs have dropped. And so if anybody wants to know about that, I encourage you to look it up. There's two groups that I have come across. One is a Christian crowd help Christian fund, or I can't remember, but I'm sure if you Google that, you'll probably find some Christian crowdsourced health insurance or something like that. And then the other one is Crowd Health, which is what I currently use. But it's not for everybody, that is for sure. And so you have to definitely like weigh what you're doing. But yeah, that's probably the extent of my wackiness because I was paying a lot and I'm pretty healthy and my family's pretty healthy. And I was like, why in the heck am I paying all this? I'm not getting anything back from it. And I realize it's in the case of later on in the future, but I feel like I could use that money and do better with it and whatever. So I kind of opted out of that system. So that's my wacky stuff on healthcare.
Well, the good news is that you're not getting a penalty just for not having like healthcare.
Yeah, there was that, right? You got to not buy unaffordable insurance, and then you got penalized for it. So okay, I think that one question I would have is essentially like, Sam, you said, okay, well, I'm relatively healthy, my family's relatively healthy. We're paying a high cost. We don't really feel like we're getting that much out of it. As Leandra says, you can't really go. You have to be in network essentially, and that kind of constrains the benefits of your insurance anyway. And they can, since the ACA, or at least may not be caused by ACA, but at least since then, there have been fewer and fewer providers in any given market. And so it's like, okay, so now you have this like regional concentration, and it's wild, but insurance pools are supposed to work something like this, that on average the healthy people help offset the burden of costs for unhealthy people. And so if I don't want an assistant, I mean, I don't know how you do this necessarily, but I think it's a predictable but unfortunate and ideally to be avoided consequence of setting up a healthcare system, that you don't want to set it up such that the healthy people try and separate from unhealthy people in a way that they're like, you can't provide that backstop for the premiums and the cost of service. I will say that as in addition to that, there's also an aspect to health in the United States where people don't always take very good care of themselves, and they burden is the word that people use, right? They have to make use of the healthcare system more than others do, and is it really fair, let's say, to spread that burden more evenly? I think we're all kind of okay with like, hey, someone who gets cancer, has a heart attack or a stroke, and it's kind of not of their own, they didn't do anything wrong, right? They were living a normal life, they ate junk food sometimes, they exercise sometimes, but they're living a relatively normal life versus someone who is making a repeated series of decisions to live in an unhealthy manner and then wants to socialize that cost across the system. I don't know how you do all this. I would say one thing you can do is the cultural side. Make it cool to be healthy again. Like, in whatever way that means. Like, you don't have to say, like, this is the one way to do it. But you can essentially try and encourage people to, like, hey, take control of your health. They're going to feel better, too, which is huge.
That was, again, I can't remember if that was RFK Jr. who had said it or if it was just Joe Rogan that had said it. But it was like during COVID. It's like, why aren't we just encouraging people to be healthy instead of you have to go get 17 vaccines for all this stuff? It's like a system where people were less obese and less with these comorbidities would have handled the pandemic a lot better. So why don't we try and boost and make people more healthy? So yeah,
it is weird to me that was never really talked about in the same light.
Do you think that's the culture that we live in, that we're living with in the U.S., where we have to accept everybody, and accept all their decisions? Is that a cultural thing? I mean, in the U.S., like talking to people in France, the U.S. had it pretty easy on lockdowns. And I was talking to people in France, and they were limited to only going out for a couple hours a day, a couple days a week.
Yard time, great.
Yeah. So, and the funny thing is, they said, well, we all got around this because we would all carry slips detailing like different times of day. So depending on the time of day we were out, we would just rotate through our slips, and the people always found a way.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one pushback that we get is that, of course, it's not fair to kind of socialize this cost on the healthcare system, but unhealthy can't be an objective truth. Healthy means different things to different people. That's true, but you still want to. I mean, whether or not we all, this is the whole like science is governed by consensus. It's like no, consensus is a second order consequence of triangulating on a reasonably good understanding that is better than the other forms of understanding. So it's like, okay, there are aspects of health that are, yeah, exactly, to Leandra's point, that are truly random in nature, stochastic. They have some inherent variability to them. There's the hereditary dimensions. There's environmental dimensions, right? So where you live and how you grow up, that can be an issue. And there's also behavioral dimensions. And I don't think that for the first three, it is. I would struggle to find a moral case to allow for penalties for those first three. But on the behavioral side, I don't know. I mean, maybe are you allowed to charge people who have a different behavioral profile differently? Maybe. It's sticky because the other thing is who's going to do this? It's going to ultimately be adjudicated by the government. So the government's going to have to come up with that. And so even though I don't think this whole healthy means different things to different people is a reason to not incentivize good behavioral things, I don't think that I don't trust the government to be able to identify what those healthy behaviors are in a way that is necessarily very reliable.
I was going to say, you can't really implement this, though, without,
right.
Getting into government overreach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's
paradox.
like all these, discounts that their car insurance companies are giving now. Safe driving if you let us track everywhere you're going.
Dude,
and let
this
us
week.
see everything you're doing in a car.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Yeah, I guess that's good, but I don't want you to see it everywhere I'm driving
mm-hmm.
at all times. So I think it's a tough balancing act, very tough balancing act.
So, okay then. What,
because I'm sure you've dealt with that car insurance stuff. Download our app and let us follow you.
mm-hmm.
Or plug this into your OBD2 and let us track your car.
Dude, I was on the phone with my insurance company this week asking, why are you pinging my phone 48 times a day? I'm not driving during all those times. And the guy gave a reasonably competent technical response. But I was like, this is kind of nonsense. So I still don't know how I'm going to handle that. Yeah, I'm with you.
Who do you have?
No. Nice try. All right.
They've really been on me for, not checking in for the past 6 weeks. I haven't been here for the past 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Man,
what do you want me to tell you?
I don't hear anything from my car insurance people. I get a bill and that's it. Maybe that's bad. Maybe I should.
No, it's probably good.
Yeah.
All right, so we are now 40 minutes over what I told you guys we'd be. I want to be respectful of your time. I think we already had to have one of our founders jump off to help his wife out with the baby. But we appreciate him coming in, his thoughts, and helping facilitate things. And
children, man.
Yeah, have them for sure. Any closing thoughts you guys want to leave our audience with? And by the way, for those who joined, thank you so much for the extensive comments and discussion. And next time we have a live stream, we might do what we did last time, which was we brought up some guests and kind of closed it out with that. That was a lot of fun. Maybe something we do in the future. And certainly, if you're interested in that, that is one of the guaranteed perks for separate supporters-only live streams at freedomcast.locals.com. So anybody have anything else they want to close with? No? Franklin, you good?
No.
Keep speaking
I'm
freely.
Good.
Keep speaking freely. Don't forget, podcast bingo for free FreedomCast merch. Just go to freedomcast.us, click around, you'll see that
Should we exclude family members and...
Nah, it's fine. Yeah. Whatever the first three people who... I'm going to exclude us. None of us can
Okay.
read it. But other than that, Sam really needed that next template. Other than that, see if you can connect 5 by listening to 10 episodes. Send us some evidence of it. And if you're interested in being a whistleblower, an anonymous contributor, or you just have some things you'd like to get off your chest, reach out to us.
Julian Assange, we're talking to you.
Yeah, like it can be as profound as that, or just as important as something that just is a thorn in your side that you wish to discuss. We will work hard to structurally and technologically protect your identity, and obviously nothing is foolproof, but we'll take on that burden. And yeah, as Sam said, until next time, keep speaking freely. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, gentlemen.
See you guys.
Yeah.